Welcome to Mediumship Moments with second-generation psychic medium Kym Durham. Join her as she shares her personal journey with mediumship, connects with your loved ones, and discusses topics dealing with spirituality.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mediumship Moments, my podcast. I'm Kym Durham. I'm a second-gen psychic medium. And here on my podcast, we talk about all realms of spirituality. And today, I think I have a pretty cool topic to discuss. I want to talk about reincarnation. Do you believe in it? Do you believe you had a past life? Well, I did a little bit of a deep dive because I had taken a workshop with Dr. Brian Weiss a few weeks ago, and I just wanted to learn about it more. And he touched upon the history, but I'd like to share with you some fun facts that I found out. So, reincarnation, right? It's the definition of it. And for all you Latin geeks out there like me, it's to take on flesh again. That's what reincarnation means. Now, many people believe in reincarnation. And in your other cultures, in Asia and Europe, with both Hinduism and Buddhism, there's a great belief in reincarnation. Here in the United States, it's a little less than that. You know, many adults here in the United States believe about 25% of you do in reincarnation. Worldwide, it's upwards of 47%, which I really found interesting that there were so many cultures out there that believe in reincarnation. So, in fact, in some religions, as I had mentioned, Hinduism and Buddhism, certain animals are symbolic of reincarnation. They talk about snakes that are transformative. They talk about the phoenix rising from the ashes, but they also talk about butterflies and those symbols being symbolic of your loved ones who had crossed over and have taken on this new form. I mean, how many of you, I can distinctly remember a story of just recently it happened. I had clients coming in and they were talking about, I often tell my clients, listen, if your loved one is sending you a symbol and it resonates to your heart, you don't need a medium to validate that symbol. Well, I had a mother-daughter in with me recently, and they talked about their sister who had crossed unexpectedly and tragically, but they decided to, when they talked about her love of gardening. And that led them to wanting to put together like a butterfly garden. You know, if you've ever seen the little butterfly bushes. So they put this all together and they've had the most magical experience with a monarch butterfly coming to them when they go out to the garden all through the summer. And it would attach itself to both the sister and the mom while they sat on the bench and would talk to the other sister who had crossed. It was, I mean, just to see them light up. And they actually showed me pictures of it. I was really blown away. But I don't know if anyone else has seen the TikTok video of a bride coming down the aisle. And after she had said her vows, they released a box of butterflies in honor of her father, who had a long battle with cancer and succumbed to that battle prior to her wedding. Well, they released the box of the monarch butterflies, and the next thing you know, I mean, her entire white dress looked as though it was painted with butterflies on it because there was quite literally almost 100 butterflies all over her. It was really a remarkable scene. So, you know, it talks about the belief of reincarnation. Is it possible? I'm always a science geek about wanting to ask, you know, is it possible that our pets could come back and reincarnate? I mean, do you have a certain pet you'd love to come back again? I mean, something to this, you know, something along this line. I know Barbara Streisand had paid for her beloved dog to be genetically recreated because she wanted to have that pet back. It was the closest thing she could get to reincarnation. I know for myself, if I could choose a pet that could come back, I'd have my crazy Chloe, my teeny weeny Airedale, all 37, 40 pounds of her with elf ear and her ability to hop like a kangaroo. But wouldn't that be neat? I mean, I just find it really, really interesting. So there's just so much really evidence supporting reincarnation. And I'm going to talk about a couple of those cases here today. It is a contentious topic, but there's so many books about the experience out there that I wanted to share with you. Now, there is one such book. It's called Children's Past Lives, How Past Life Memories Affect Your Child. It's by Carol Bowman. And this woman had an amazing situation with her son, Chase. And she talks about her son and his nightmares. And she's compiled stories of cases, not only of her sons, but of others. But let me talk about Chase. So this beautiful little boy would wake up in the middle of the night, crying, kicking, screaming, and would go on to tell her about describing his life on a battlefield during the Civil War and that he had died. And he kept waking up and waking up. Now, just to preface this, typically reincarnation, this type of past life trauma, is seen with tragic crossings, unalivings, whether that's shooting, whether it's a car accident, where there's some kind of trauma behind this that they believe is the catalyst of why these children have these nightmares. Now, I'm not saying all nightmares children have are from past life, but in Chase's case, he would wake up and relive these scenes. And so his mom started to take notes. And what she did is, and again, it wasn't asking Chase every day, Chase, did you have him? They usually ask the kids after they've bathed, when they're relaxed. But in Chase's situation, he went on to describe in great detail, not only the scene, his rank, his uniform, certain implements that he had on him as an officer, and all of these things. Carol took notes and then went on to authenticate with numerous Civil War authorities. So how would a 3.5-year-old gorgeous baby little boy know all of these facts? Truly, truly, I thought it was just absolutely astonishing. And once he started to talk about these nightmares that he had, his phobia of loud noises, which he had, just imagine the clapping and the thunder of a battlefield. So this poor boy had phobias and just would freak every time he heard a loud noise. But after he started to talk about his experiences and was able to work through that, they call it regression therapy or hypnotherapy, his phobia of loud noises and the chronic eczema that he had throughout his entire body disappeared once he was able to talk about those memories. So I just found that fascinating. It truly, she compiled dozens of cases, like I said, and wrote a comprehensive study to talk about these children. Typically 2 to 5 years of age is when they remember their past lives, and they're done spontaneously without anybody invoking any question to them. The kids will often say, well, you're not my mommy. Or my daddy, his name was, James in a past life. Not Robert, it was James. They'll start with topics like that or statements like that. So there's a place called the Division of Perpetual Studies. It's in the University of Virginia, Arlington. And Ian Stevenson was the first director who started this over 50 years ago. They've been studying this. And it is just, now Ian really, because reincarnation was much more accepted, did a lot of his study abroad and then brought more study here to the United States later during his time heading up that division. The next person who took over the role there is Dr. Jim Tucker. Now, Dr. Jim Tucker, again, he's a psychiatrist at the Division of Perceptual Studies at UVA. He was on the Netflix special Surviving Death. And it was on that show that he spoke of a very profound case that I'll get into. But Dr. Tucker talks about that these memories for these children, both male and female, although for some reason, more boys tend to have past life regression remembrance. And well, if you think about it, boys tend to take more. Any parents out there that have boys totally understand this. They're always jumping off of something, jumping into something, and tend to live more fearlessly and statistically have more accidents or cross from accidents. But Dr. Tucker talked about the average age of these memories is usually around 35 months. Now, and it ends by the time they're school age, typically 6 years of age. They also, these children that have these past life regression memories actually are early verbalizers. They're able to talk quicker than most children. And they tend to, it's interesting when they talked about this, the average age is 4.5. They tend to be newer stories though. So what do I mean by that? When they come forth and share these stories, if they're talking about a tragedy, obviously with a car accident, it's something newer. Now, Dr. Tucker he talks about a couple cases. There's some children that have presented a case that they were one of the jumpers from 9/11. And Dr. Tucker talks about how, they will research everything. And they researched over 2,500 cases a year, especially since this Netflix specialist came out. But there's a lot of cultural influences in reincarnation. The other cultures want that to be the father. The son comes forward. He looks just like his grandfather. And there's great pressure on the child from the family that, yep, you're your grandfather. You absolutely are. As opposed here in the United States, where our parents are like, this is so not what I want, that this can't be. This isn't something that parents from the United States tend to shy away from talking about it. Now, there's a story I want to talk about that Dr. James Tucker talks about, and it's really, really remarkable that came about from his investigation. It's called, and this is again in the Surviving Death on Netflix. If you haven't watched it, you really should. It's truly, truly amazing. Not a paid endorsement for Netflix, but it's a really cool series. And it delves into all facets of death. People have had near-death experiences. They talk about psychic mediums. It's really well done. But anyway, so let's get back to the story of third James. Now, this young boy, his real name is James Lindinger, and he would wake up screaming at night when he was a little over 2, and he kept stating, airplane crash. On fire, little man can't get out. So imagine a 2.5-year-old little boy waking up and screaming and, terrified at night. It was interesting. During the day, James always used to play with an airplane and crash it. And he'd talk about in flames. So he then went on when they again questioned him. And again, it's in a non-threatening way. It's not like they're sitting him down and now James, tell us about this. He, after bath time or just relaxed, kids, when they're drawling, they'll just start to say stuff. And James started to share information with his family. He described how he was shot down in Japan and that his plane quickly sank. But what was interesting is that James knew exactly what compartment and what area of the plane. He also knew what type of plane it was. He's not even 3 yet, and he's giving such specific information. And he also talked about the boat that the plane took off from, and he used the word Natoma. So the boat that he described, the Natoma, was stationed as an escort fleet out in the Pacific Ocean. And Third James went on to talk about, he kept giving the name Jack Larson. He talked about this man on the boat. So here's his father, James III's father, was just appalled at the idea that this little boy, 3 years of age, is talking about being a pilot, being shot down by Japanese fighters during World War II and giving such detail. So the father went on to start to investigate this. And he printed out a picture of Iwo Jima. He actually took pictures of different islands. And James pointed exactly to the right island and to the right bay of where his plane sank. And it was always interesting when James would be playing and, drawing or whatever, he would always sign his drawings, James with 1, 2, 3. And that's how the story comes with him being James III. Always all of these little idiosyncrasies or things that James would do during the day or his, daily life during the week. So his father took such an interest in the stories and truly biggest skeptic on the face of the earth, found that there was what was called a Natoma Bay reunion where other pilots would go and support each other, recount their battles during World War II, and, just have some sense of camaraderie. So James's father went to this reunion. Here at that reunion, he was able to ask specific questions. And he found out that there in fact was another pilot on the boat by the name of Jack Larson. But the only person that ever was killed in action was James Houston Jr. All of these details matched up. And it was just such emotion that his father could finally put the pieces of the puzzle together. And after James talked about this, went to the reunion, he stopped taking the airplane and playing and mimicking it and having it crash. So it's just really interesting that these two stories, although in different parts of the United States at different time frames, really show a collaborative pieces to the puzzle about how these children are affected by these nightmares. And once they are given the opportunity to delve into these memories and walk through those memories, that they no longer are traumatized by them. And there was another gentleman that came up in my studies and looking into this, and it was Edgar Cayce. Now, I don't know if any of you know of that gentleman. He crossed in 1945 at the age of 77. But prior to his crossing, he had such knowledge about certain Egyptian medical, how shall I say this, procedures, and just was this walking encyclopedia of information. He was a very religious man, plainly educated, but had a wealth of knowledge of over 2,500 files of things, of places that he went to, things that he talked about, and knowledge that he had. He was just an extraordinary American psychic. He was really the father of regressive therapy. The best way I can tell you is that Edgar Cayce would go into like a hypnotic state. Just, you could do that. I'm sure we've all listened to music, or we just get to that point where we're just at a different beta frame for our mind. And he'd go into these type of sessions and just start to write things. And it was phenomenal that the things that he wrote about, Dr. Edgar Cayce, what he wrote about turned out that through research, 40, 50, 60 years later, became validated. That information was not known at the time that Dr. Cayce had written about it. And you're like, where did it come from? So again, I talk about past life regression, reincarnation. Like, do you believe that you were someone else? I have talked personally that there are things that I know that I shouldn't know that are part of my life. And I also talk about when clients come and sit with me and they'll show me a picture of their child. Sometimes I have seen with clients sitting in front of me things that they may have done in their past life. Now, I'm not trained to do it. It's just, if you've worked with me, I tell you about the pages that I see within the chapter of your life. And sometimes I see books. And I may have seen a previous book, I'll call it. But people will show me pictures of their kids and I'll point. Let's say they had 5 kids. Right away, I'll point to, let's say, this little girl. I said, oh my goodness, she is just such an old lady. The old soul. There's like 3 old ladies inside of her. And a mother of like 5, this is like the 4th kids, not the babies, not the older. She's like, oh my God, my Cindy talked at a young age, knew things. She came to this world or this lifetime with more knowledge than you would have thought. So maybe you have an old soul in your life, and maybe you're an old soul, and maybe you walked in a different form, in a different lifetime. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on reincarnation. Drop me a line at Mediumship Moments on my Instagram page. Tell me if you believe in reincarnation, if you think you were somebody in your past life, if you've got an old soul in your family and can totally relate to this. I'd love to hear how you feel about it. So as I always end my podcast, Mediumship Moments, I would love to share with you one. I recently had a gentleman and a young lady sit in front of me. I'm actually working on her son's case. He crossed unexpectedly, and there's some elements of some hidden information she's trying to glean to be able to give to the authorities. I've actually worked with her on other cases, and it is an honor to work with her, although it's tragic to work with her because of the loss of her son. But before we got into me holding on to the evidence and using my psychic ability for psychometry, her partner was sitting next to her. And somebody from the other side, Ed's father, came through and could see him as a Southern gentleman. He had smoking a pipe. He had a hat on. He had a walking stick that he used to whittle. And he started walking me around the property. And he showed me this little house. And he showed me this hole or cave. And he kept telling me, Ed, don't go over there with the dog. Don't go over there with the dog. Well, here, there's a spring house on their property. And there is, in fact, a hole that kind of looks like a cave. It's just on the side of a hill kind of thing. And I have never been to this property. And really, Ed had to think about it and got some feedback from Mel about it. And she's like, oh my goodness. I showed them my drawing. They absolutely knew what his father was forewarning him about. So Ed was thrilled that his dad came forward with loving messages and a forewarning about walking the pup out there. And it brought him some comfort to know that his dad's still looking out after him. So, as I always encourage you to do, keep chatting with your angels because they can hear you.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time for another episode of Mediumship Moments. If you enjoyed this episode of Kim's podcast, check her out on Instagram and TikTok at Kym Durham Medium.